afternoon. My name is Tiffany Williams, and I'm Field Marketing Specialist for Pantheon, and I will be your host for today. We have a wonderful presentation today on the research findings for Simpson-Scarborough's latest study into the state of higher education, website, and marketing technology. And our expert panelists for today, we have a great group. We have Malachi Koop, who's our Director of Marketing, and Bob Rafferty, who's the VP of Creative and Digital for Simpson-Scarborough. We also have Steve Persh, our Director of Technical Marketing for Pantheon. And we also have Jason Douglas, our Digital Marketing Sales Engineer for Siteimprove. Just a few housekeeping items. For any questions, Q&A questions you may have, please enter them into the Q&A chat at the bottom of the window, and we will get to your questions as we get to the Q&A portion of the webinar. This webinar is also being recorded, which you will receive following this recording, the webinar, and as well as a survey. All right, and with that, I will go on and kick it off over to Bob Rafferty.
Great, thanks so much. So you can go and open up the full agenda here, Malachi. I'm going to run through the executive summary, which will take us till about 1:20 Eastern time. And then we're going to jump to a panel discussion and Q&A for the remainder of the time. But the first thing I'm going to do here is go off script just a bit and share just some of the background in terms of why we created this study. Really, it was built out of wanting to build awareness for the importance of defining the martech stack within higher ed marketing, and push that beyond some of the boundaries where we see it currently at this phase. We surveyed on a range of topics, but wanted to begin to track what's emerging and hope to annualize this study over time. So, if a lot of us are here, probably understand why your martech stack matters, but in higher ed, it matters frankly because we're a little bit late to the game as marketing and technologists when you compare ourselves to other industries. We live and work inside of pretty complicated organizational structures that are slow to change. And with that reality, though, the education industry is on the cusp of massive change, and marketing technologies are going to matter more than ever. So if you're not starting to push and press and iterate and optimize, your voice as an institution is going to become harder and harder to find. So looking at your stack, growing it, beginning to utilize first-party data, building expertise about how to grow and convert audience should be part of your strategic plan as an institution, or if not as an institution, certainly as a marketing department. So our studies helped us identify what a mature higher education marketing organization looks like. That's one of the big takeaways that I'll be walking you through here in a few minutes. And we want to use that model as something that the industry can begin to aspire towards and begin to benchmark themselves year over year. So Simpson-Scarborough, it has been known as a market research company. So this study shouldn't be a big surprise for us or for you that we've begun to look at this area. But what you might not know is that the research arm is only about half of our business at this time. We're a very fully integrated agency with a range of services. The two groups that I oversee really have a unique perspective in the confluence of design, content, and technology. We test our work. It's something that makes us unique among our competitors. Most agencies really don't want to know how their brands are performing year to year, but we do. That's where the integration of our research team really makes a difference in all of our lines of service. And from our perspective, if we're not going to measure it, someone else will, and your audiences sure will measure your effectiveness for you. So in this study, like all of our research, it's meant to empower all of higher education marketers and ultimately advance the industry that we care so much about. We hope that this data is used by senior administrators, board of directors, and other agency partners. We hope it's something you come back to, just like our CMO study, which will be released early next year. So now let me say one more thing before we move into our insights. I want to thank a few people on our team, which is mainly Malachi and Meredith, for all the hard work that they've put in on this study. And then, of course, our larger team who fielded and prepared the findings, including all the visualizations that you're going to see in this deck. I also want to thank our two partners that are on the call with us here. We're so glad that you could do this work for us and look forward to discussing all of this with you in a few minutes. All right, so we can go ahead and move into the first slide of the executive summary. Right, so we do have two really kind of key takeaways here. The first is that most institutions that we surveyed lack a cohesive website and marketing technology strategy. How do we know that? Well, it was really apparent in the data and what we're going to walk you through in terms of looking at different sections of the study itself. But within those indicators, well, less than 50% of our survey respondents have a well-defined accessibility standards. Less than 50% are using performance metrics to advance their website and marketing efforts. Only 35% of institutions have integrated their CRM with their CMS. And of those ones that have integrated, we're just not seeing a lot of evidence in the data that they have the KPIs in place to make that effective. And we'll share more of that in a minute. Now, on the upside, we're seeing strong evidence in some segments that respondents are modernizing and taking new approaches. So within those key points, 84% of respondents are happy with their CMS solution. 72% of respondents have deployed some version of cloud hosting. 44% state that their website is part of their institutional strategic plan. And 58% are focused on modernizing the user experience in the next iteration of their EDU redesign. So in our study, we really found 4 commonalities that define a mature and well-resourced operation. This is really where we're going to spend a lot of our time in the next 10 minutes is talking more about what that means. But there's 4 attributes. One is that they measure. We used established KPIs as a proxy for measurement success, and only 45% of respondents said that they have established KPIs. The second area is that they iterate. We defined iterate as operations who are constantly iterating both their website design and development and their content. So only 41% of respondents said that they're using analytics to constantly iterate the design and development of their website experiences. And then our third attribute is that they integrate. So we define integrate as operations who combine website analytics with CRM analytics, 2 major platforms that tell a lot about your audience. Only 31% of respondents indicated that they combine those 2 metrics. And then overwhelmingly, the fourth is that they report into central Marcom. So 61% of our respondents said that they reported into central Marcom versus 31% into IT. There's an outlier of about 8% there that reports somewhere else within the organizational structure. So we'll dig in here now and tell you a little bit more about what each of these 4 areas mean. And we can go ahead and advance into the next section, Malachi. Great. So looking at this maturity model a little bit more deeply, and we dig in here to what it actually means to measure. You can see here that 45% of respondents indicated that they have established key performance indicators for their website. And then within that cohort, they're 3 times more likely to be utilizing tools for UX optimization. They're 4 times more likely to be utilizing SEO tools for optimization. They're 40% more likely to be utilizing tools for assessing website performance. And it goes on, right? There's a significant factor here that when you measure and you spend your time in that space, you're going to have a lot more deep areas that you're really going into. You can move to the next slide. Well, when we then looked at the breakout for who's happy with their CMS, there was another correlation here. 50% of those who responded that they were happy have established KPIs versus 28% without established KPIs. That's very significant and tells us that some institutions are really spinning their wheels when it comes to trying to fine tune their CMS when really they don't have anything that they're benchmarking their performance against. So instead of focusing on the big goal, they're focused on the underlying platform, which could be a barrier for them. So again, more mature organizations have those tools in place, are looking at KPIs at a recurring timeframe, and that leads to more satisfaction with their CMS. Going deeper into our next section of iterate. We looked at two different factors here to build out this measure of maturity. We looked at design and development and content, and then the frequency at which maintaining and enhancing the content or the design and development within those areas. So you can see in the top section of the chart here that the darkest area, these are organizations who are constantly iterating based on analytics, and it makes up well under 50% of the survey respondents. Within that segment then, when we isolated those, we could see that they were more than twice as likely to be utilizing tools for UX optimization. They're more likely to be doing A/B testing. They're 150 times more likely to be utilizing SEO tools for optimization. And they're nearly twice as likely to have established metrics and KPIs. So as we look and we get deeper into this in our discussion a bit, you'll start to see a real pattern that's emerging here in what we are now defining as a mature organizational model. You can move to the next slide. Going a little bit deeper here then in this iterate section, operations that are constantly iterating have more sophisticated development. This is really interesting just in terms of looking at the overall use of quality control tools such as multi-stage workflows, systems for formal code review, version control, and enforcement of accessibility standards. Again, you're seeing a pretty significant difference there between those operations that are constantly iterating versus those that are not, represented by the dark bar and the light bar. When we look then at frequency of reporting then, operations that are constantly iterating on design and content are to assess their website performance more frequently. So frequency of assessing website performance is correlated here in these results. You can see that there's nearly a 22% change between those types of approaches for website performance. Move to the next slide. When we look at integration then, our big indicator here was, does an organization combine their website analytics with their CRM analytics? Only 31% of organizations do that. And of that 31%, they're more than twice as likely to be utilizing tools for UX optimization, twice as likely for SEO, and they're 6 times more likely to be reporting into Marcom than IT. So this again reinforces here what that maturity model looks like. You can move to the next slide. And then as we get into then really looking at specific KPIs, just the space between these two types of respondents is really significant in every area. So those who do not iterate, who do not integrate website analytics and CRM analytics are incredibly less likely to be measuring for these KPIs of admission inquiries, applications, visit inquiries, and online gifts. And I'm sure most people here, understand the significance of having those KPIs, and where we see them being measured, there's a strong correlation in here to whether or not they're iterating then with that approach. Move on to the next section. And then our last section here is regarding reporting into Marcom. You can see on the chart on the right, or on the left, this shows our overall population within the survey. And then when we break that down and we look at marketing and communication reporting lines specifically, we can then begin to see where this correlation builds with a lot of the key indicators that we reported in the last sections. Like they're 2 times more likely to have established KPIs for their website. They're 2 times more likely to combine their website analytics with CRM analytics. They're more likely to be utilizing tools for UX and SEO, and they're more likely to be assessing website performance and accessibility. You can move on to the next section. Okay, so at this point, Malachi is going to lead us through a moderated discussion here, and then we're going to move to the chat for a little bit of Q&A.
Awesome, thanks, Bob. So yeah, we're going to dive deeper into the findings, but fair warning, we're not going to get to everything. The full report that, like Tiffany said, you'll receive after today's webinar, something like 70 pages long. So there's a lot in there. We're going to do the best to get through some main topics, but also make sure you're putting your questions in the Q&A, and then I'll get us started. But Tiffany, feel free to chime in and give our panelists some additional questions. But real quick, I want to add a quick note about our partners. So Pantheon and Siteimprove have lended their expertise to this study. They've helped us create a really holistic research study that encompasses higher ed website and marketing technology, both strategically and technically. And they've also lended their expertise to help develop our survey instrument, provide analysis, and share some key insights from their respective subject matter domains. Simpson Scarborough has always been tool agnostic, and that's intentional, and that hasn't changed. But we do love partnering with companies that advance the industry and help support the important work of higher education marketers. So just suffice it to say that we're paid subscribers of both of these platforms, either for ourselves or for our clients. And we're really grateful not only for the partnership here, but all they do for the industry. Without further ado, let's get into it. So my first question is actually about the state of CMS. So nearly half of all respondents, about 48%, report that they are not using open source CMS. And my first question to panelists is just, is that surprising? What are your thoughts on that? Is this a missed opportunity?
Steve Persher, I'll jump in and respond to that. I think on the surface, I don't know that there's a correct or ideal distribution there. Like working at Pantheon, a platform that serves Drupal and WordPress, I could talk all day about how Drupal and WordPress are great for nearly any type of website, especially well suited to the needs of higher education. However, like the proprietary solutions are bought for a reason. They provide real value to their customers. I think open source provides a lot of opportunity for cross collaboration, not only university to university, but also within an institution. At Pantheon, we work with a number of universities where we will sell to one department and then another, and they don't even know that the other side is using WordPress or Drupal or Pantheon for that matter. So the open nature of Drupal and WordPress create a lot more opportunities for reuse, a lot more opportunities for creating connection that I see as net beneficial to nearly anyone who needs a website, especially in an ecosystem like higher education, where there's a cultural expectation about emerging best practices. There's, I think, a similarity between the way the ecosystem of academia works and tries to find the truth, tries to find the right answers to any given subject, and the way the WordPress and Drupal community in particular pursue the best way to do any given thing, be it fielded content or be it search engine optimization. I think that's part of what brings the appeal of Drupal and WordPress to the higher ed space.
Yeah, and I'd say, just to add on that a little bit from our perspective too, you know, we always say that the best CMS is the right fit for the institution or the subunit within the institution, and that tends to do with what the resources look like in-house. So, you know, there's always more time to support open source than there is when you're working with a proprietary platform where support comes along with the annual agreement with them. So I think that, you know, what we should really be, you know, kind of evaluating CMS on is, what are the integration points? What are the points where we can begin to personalize content? What are the points where we can really, you know, capture more information about the audiences that are on the site, and what individuals from a human perspective are there to then be utilizing those features and functions to actually bring intelligent marketing to the organization.
Okay, so related to that is web hosting. So 28% of institutions are still self-hosting their site on premise. Another 33% are self-hosting in the cloud. Is that surprising given the resource constraints that most institutions face? Or what surprises you about these findings?
I think what surprised us, or our team, I'd love to hear Steve's perspective too, but it's just that we finally kind of reached that threshold where we essentially have a significant portion that is in the cloud and has moved away from on-prem hosting. As you said, there's a lot of overhead in that, and the costs have now, you know, kind of reached a point where we would expect almost everyone to be universally looking at cloud hosting options, whether they're self-managed or managed.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I was surprised to see self-hosted on-prem still at more than a quarter of respondents. That was the story of my own first usage of Pantheon for a higher education customer. In my previous job working in an agency, we worked with a lot of higher ed customers, many of whom were making that journey from, like, there's a literal server in a basement on campus, and there's a person whose job involves making sure that room is at the right temperature and has uninterrupted bandwidth and electricity. And I don't think many people want those job responsibilities anymore, when platforms like Google Cloud, AWS, Microsoft, like, they can keep the literal lights on, they can keep the electricity on much more stably than thousands of companies all around the world. You know, Pantheon ourselves, we're built on top of Google Cloud. We don't want someone on staff whose job it is to make sure that the literal server room where literal machines are plugged into literal electricity is at the right temperature. That's not where we are trying to add value, and I don't think that's where most universities want their staff focusing either.
Switching gears here a little bit, this is looking a little bit at governance, but one of the things that I think is really telling about this is that Less than half of all respondents are reporting that their website is part of their institution's strategic plan. So coming off of a global pandemic where like all of our lives were forced online, and still less than half of higher ed institutions are saying that, you know, this is even part of their strategic plan is surprising. And less than a third even say that it's a cohesive property with a unified strategy. So, you know, is this a leadership issue? Is this evidence of an industry historically insulated from market pressure? Or, you know, what can teams do to make up ground here quickly?
I'd say that in this survey, we weren't too surprised to see this, in that website has always been something that's kind of been distributed further down in the organization. And even within marketing and comms in general, there's still a fair percentage of institutions out there without a central report into the executive level. So I think that when we think about it from that angle, realizing that it's not part of the strategic plan or that there isn't a comprehensive strategy isn't terribly surprising. And we hope that these findings can be used by senior leaders to bring to executives at their institution to help move this effort forward. It's likely one of the most important things that an institution can do as they're looking, you know, kind of down the line about what enrollment challenges are going to look like in the next few years, and building up the website as a resource to attract and build audience will be significantly important.
Hey, Malachi, we have a ton of questions. If it's okay to jump in and just ask a few of them before we move forward.
Please.
All right, great. So I have one from Regina Amodovan. In terms of website positions reporting to Marcom, do those include the tech people managing the CRM back-end development, or is this simply front-end development and design?
It was both in terms of this survey. So we have a breakdown on one of these slides, yeah, where we actually show, is that right, Malachi? Yeah, where we show if the institution had split reporting, you would see that broken out. But for those who responded that development is part of the marketing function, that was included in that total.
Wonderful. Another question, Jordan Kilby, what were the most common UX and SEO tools institutions were using? So what were the tools were they using?
Yeah, that's a great question. Meredith, is that something we can post in the chat, that full list out of the survey itself?
Yeah, I can pull that up.
Awesome.
All right, wonderful. And then one more, and then we can move forward, and then we'll go to the other questions a little later. So what are your recommendations for reporting KPIs to higher leadership level, president, suite, and board? What level of detail and what frequency?
So from our recommendation standpoint, monthly would be the highest frequency and quarterly would be the lowest frequency. If you're reporting less often than that, you're likely not keeping this information in front of them at that highest level. And it's likely to fall off someone's radar of a performance indicator for the institution as a whole, right? So when you move that frequency up towards monthly, there's generally enough data within various campaigns that might be running or within other KPIs or goals you may have set that you can show a correlation in the resources that are being devoted to the institutional website and where those are actually helping the institution perform at a higher level. Within this, is this a slide you have pulled up, Malachi? No, we're looking at reporting lens here. If you can pull up that slide that shows the frequency of reporting, it is pretty interesting. I think it's, there we go, yeah. So these weekly and monthly reports are great. You're just at the weekly level, you're likely to not be seeing a lot of change over time, or you can't really correlate that to some activity that may have happened beyond a potential like singular bump through a campaign. So seeing that most institutions, there's that 31, so we're at 70% that are reporting at that recommended frequency. When you get down into that ad hoc or rarely, that there's a lot of opportunity to really gain some from having a regular cadence with senior leadership.
All right, thanks, Bob.
Great. Tiffany, do you have any more questions, or do you want me to keep going?
You can keep going, and we'll go ahead. I'll kind of stop you in the middle of the next 2 slides and get more questions answered.
Great. Okay,
Awesome.
So here we're looking at the top drivers for future web design. Again, what jumps out at you as surprising? Is this kind of in line with what you thought? I know that we had talked about maybe the impact of COVID-19 would be fairly significant if really registered. What are your thoughts here?
I think it's great to see that 58% of our respondents were focused on modernizing their user experience. Most of us know that there's a lot of room there to improve user experience throughout a lot of the different EDUs that we have a chance to evaluate. And knowing that we're thinking about modernizing an experience and tying that to content strategy is significant, I think, in this study as well.
Great. I want to jump ahead here to analytics. So we wanted to look at how institutions are gathering these analytics through various platforms. Outside of Google Analytics, which is obviously fairly ubiquitous, there's kind of a fall off. Is there a lack of understanding how some of these platforms can truly assist institutions achieve their goals? Or what do you make of these findings?
Yeah, Jason here, I'll step in. And yeah, I think there is a lack of understanding. We work with over 1,100 higher ed groups, and some of you are customers here. Thanks for being with us. And we do run into Google Analytics a lot. And while it's a nice free tool, it's confusing, and that can prevent people from opening their eyes to what's really there. And we're lucky that a lot of people do use Siteimprove analytics, which goes more into the user behavior and user journeys and understanding what people are and are not doing. And I think it shouldn't necessarily be a fear of this overwhelming amount of data that's available to you, but really understanding what you're looking to accomplish with specific content and if you're getting that outcome or not. And then also thinking of data in a bit of a different way. Instead of just saying, hey, we've got visits, page views, bounces, and so on, which are important metrics, but should not be honed in on just singularly. Think of all the data that you have access to, whoever you're using, as an ongoing focus group. Because every visitor you have coming to your site, they're telling you something. And you may not want to hear it because you expect everyone's going to apply or do one of the main KPIs you're measuring, if you're measuring. But we need to learn from that, because everything that our team does or your team does should be for the visitor. Period. If we're not thinking about the visitor first, that's a significant roadblock and potentially culture change you need to overcome. It's not about what I want on the site or what leadership necessarily wants, unless you can tie it back into what a visitor wants. If you can't, then you probably shouldn't do it.
Speaking of KPIs, these are the of those who are measuring KPIs. What are they looking at, and what are they regularly assessing? Again, is there anything that that jumps out at you here? Obviously, most of these are enrollment driven. We know that especially during COVID, Central Marcom was tasked more than ever with really supporting the admissions and enrollment functions. What else do you make of these findings?
These are pretty straightforward. We'd expect enrollment to be the #1 reason that people are measuring. But one thing I've run into specifically with higher ed is there's this feeling that they're trying to be everything for everyone. And that can cause issues with said experience. If there's 10 different things that I could do on a page, well, what should I focus on? And if some of them are somewhat related, that can diminish the ability to actually go through that process. So it's really important for organizations to think about every key page of content and make sure that they have, very specific goals for what you want that visitor to do. If it's to apply, well, let's make sure we're making that very clear. If it's to give, donate, if you're alumni, let's make sure that's the main point. But just, see many different opportunities, understanding that visiting is a part of the journey, applying is part of the journey. You might be a graduate student, but just really focusing on what the point is of specific content and what you want the visitor to get out of it, along with yourself getting some value out of it as well.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up that point about giving, because I think Bob noted here in the report that that making a gift is a common call to action, and yet only 1 in 5 are reporting doing any sort of ongoing assessment around it. And this is at a time where we know there's a recent Inside Higher Ed research study into presidents, and they're feeling sort of post-COVID, knowing that they lost a lot of revenue, auxiliary revenue. And I think only 1 in 4 feel very comfortable about their institution's financial position on a 10-year timeline. And number one area they're looking to make up that revenue is in new donor bases. So again, it kind of goes back to this idea of Marcom being a strategic driver, driving institutional goals, and more sort of cross-campus collaboration. What needs to happen in order for higher ed marketers, CMOs, to really change the way that institutional leadership is thinking about not just Marcom, but these digital properties, and maximizing their effectiveness?
At Pantheon, we often say website operations is a team sport. And I think getting past that fear of like, oh, we're in a very bad financial position, and part of the reason why is because we don't have a coherent path towards online giving. Solving that requires a group of people from a bunch of corners of the university to feel like they are a team tasked with, among other things, solving that particular problem. And without that team sense, it's hard to address any of these pain points. If any given thing on the website, if changing a landing page, if changing CMSs feels like you have to cross these very entrenched silos just to do your job, well, then you might not be able to do your job if any given thing requires reaching beyond your normal sphere. And that's why I think it's critical that you create those kind of cross-functional teams. Earlier, some of the data was organized around who is reporting up to whom, and it's possible that like there's an ideal org structure here, but I imagine for many of the attendees here, like changing the org chart of the university is not like a realistic quarterly or year-long or decade-long goal. But it might be more realistic to get people across the org chart, however the org chart looks, to feel like they're a team working together on the website, and more specifically, increasing something like online gifts.
Yeah, and I would
go ahead.
No, I would just say that would be consistent across, everything when you're considering marketing technology and the implementation of those types of platforms and tools. We certainly need to be considering what working groups and task force and other organizational structures may exist across the university for your website. But if you're not considering then the broader implication of the tools that you're using outside of just the website, where are you gathering data from other touch points? Having a really coordinated strategy there, I think, is also really important, and it's something that we want to start to, or that we've begun to talk a lot more with institutions about. one of the findings in this study based around CRM showed that I think the numbers 90% of respondents indicated that they used a secondary platform for email marketing outside of their CRM, which the power of your CRM, particularly as it's connected to email marketing, is to really evaluate the effectiveness of the leads that you have in that CRM. So when we consider the data that is getting lost from using a secondary service, we really wonder, and we didn't ask about it, but we wonder, how many institutions then are coming back and reloading and tying that data to the user that's in the CRM. There are a couple of questions in the QA that are a little bit more specific around CRM and CMS integrations, and I think from our angle, every solution has its own way to integrate. The more advanced options and the more popular ones or the more common ones that showed up in our survey, like Slate and Salesforce, do have ways that you can really tie user activity on the site back to the record within the CRM, and you can begin using that to personalize content or to personalize other marketing strategies that may exist outside of your owned website. You might choose to use that data in different ways for paid media campaigns, or you might even mine that data then for commonalities in it around what content is most valuable to certain audience segments. All of that type of research is going to make your whole ability to connect with audiences so much stronger. And it's something that I think we're looking forward to following over time to see where that might begin to change and where those type of strategies might begin to emerge.
I love that you brought that up and jumped there, because one of the things that we were looking at, I know we talk a lot about, and so do a lot of other people, but when we were looking at these goals for digital properties, this improving agility and the ability to meet the moment, this sort of responsiveness is something that we're seeing a lot in people's digital strategies. And one of the things that we talk about is you can't have much of a digital strategy without a data strategy. And so when we see this desire to improve agility and meet the moment, and then we see CMS and CRM integration at only 35%, which correct me if I'm wrong, Bob, I think that's what 2019 or 2019 CMO study showed as well, was 35% were saying that they're integrated. So we really haven't seen much move there. How often do you see institutions want to put together a really comprehensive digital strategy and they can't, because they're not even they have no data strategy, let alone are integrating tools?
I think this ties in with what Steve was saying, just around this is a team sport, and likely a lot of the reasoning is because the marketing and comms office or division is separate from enrollment and is separate from advancement. Advancement may have their own CRM, enrollment has a CRM, and that's not a team sport at this point at most institutions. The ones where it is, they're the ones seeing probably the most success with what that integration can look like.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Hey,
Yeah.
Malachi. Oh, sorry about that.
Oh, I was just going to say, seeing that question, do you plan to integrate your CMS and the CRM? I would ask, does the person who controls the CMS even know the name of the person who controls the CRM? Because if those two people do not know each other, and if they don't perceive themselves as on the same team, then their systems are not going to integrate.
Awesome. Well, we have some wonderful Q&A questions that I would love to get to and have you all answer live. So can you give examples of how institutions put the website in their strategic plan, and what does that look like?
Great question.
Yeah, it's in terms of integration into the strategic plan, we do have a couple of clients, we can follow up with that on exact names to refer to, but who have done that, and it's led towards things like long-term funding. It's led towards developing more resources for the goals as they're staged over multi-year timelines. I think that's like the real power of a strategic plan, is that it's not a snapshot of 1 year or 2 years. It's often a 5 to 10 year plan, and we know that technology will change dramatically over a 5 or 10 year timeline. However, considering where near-term needs need to be met versus long-term, and having some institutional awareness at the board level for that, even, and where investments need to happen, that's the real opportunity that a institution has in moving its website into the strategic plan. Same goes for marketing efforts as a whole. We work with a lot of different types of universities, various scales, and when we're looking at what their long-term marketing plans are, those should really be aligned with the strategic plan and woven through them. You can't create new academic opportunities or consider fundraising or anything really that's core to the strategic plan outcomes without considering how you're going to build audience for it.
All right, wonderful.
Yep.
And should reporting be ramped up seasonally based on application submission deadlines?
I think seasonal and year-over-year reporting can be a good indicator of how effective your marketing is year to year, particularly on your website. Though, if you're really iterating and evolving your site, you should see those numbers change more frequently, and oftentimes the reporting that we see is disconnected from an array of marketing partners. So in any given year, if the institution changes who they're working with during a particular period of time, how they're generating leads, you can see that move significantly through the analytics that come back from the website. So understanding that there might not be a baseline, and that you should be evaluating your performance against the resources that you put in during that cycle, I think is how we tend to advise and look at that type of reporting.
Wonderful. Lindsay Hempstead would like to know, how are most marketing ops organized? Do many of them support tech enhancements and decentralized content updates, allowing stakeholders to self-serve to make updates? How do teams define the line for who does what?
It varies greatly is the answer to that. I think when we look at what the more mature organizations look like, there's a significant level of content and design that's owned by central marketing, and then there's some distributed authorship at the college, office, and department level for content that has a need to be updated frequently. When you then get into where design and development resources are housed, our experience is that the more those resources can be working in concert with each other, the more successful they're going to be. That doesn't mean they have to be in the same department. As Steve just talked through, reorging at some institutions is very challenging. So if those resources do happen to be split, building teams is your next best option to really have an effective organization that can be working towards the same goals year over year. And I think as that's kind of at that mid-level. Once you go higher than that, having a web advisory group that has your CIO and your CMO as the chair of that group, I think is something that is really important for any institution, because more than likely the resources are going to flow downward from those two individuals, and making room for them to lead this effort, I think is really important, particularly for the future of where we all need to head.
Awesome.
You'll see in the full report, but we had actually talked about potentially putting together some sort of martech governance model that doesn't involve a complete org structure change, but just a team of representative from across campus to make sure that those tools are being used effectively and the data is being shared. We're certainly seeing like the amount of collaboration in the corporate world. We actually note in the report, a recent study from Gardner said that I think it's 1 out of 4 Fortune 500 companies are combining their sales, marketing, and customer service into a single department by 2023. That's both a high penetration rate and a really quick timeline. And so we're continually seeing that sort of collaboration in the corporate world. And we know that we're lagging behind in higher ed, but I think there are some steps that that we can take and that we included in this report to show, you know, at least in the interim, here's something that you can do to make up some ground.
Wonderful. And then Joe Pecora would like to know, does the term Google Analytics encompass Google Search Console, Google Data Studio, etc.?
Sorry, would you repeat that? I was answering somebody in the chat. I apologize.
Oh, no worries, no worries. Does the term Google Analytics encompass Google Search Console, Google Data Studio, etc.?
No, not in our survey, not in the way that the survey was written. No, it does not. Those would be looked at as 3 separate entities. Institutions who are doing this well are integrating all of that reporting into Studio and looking at that data as one big block of opportunity to move. But the way we wrote the survey, those were not combined entities.
Awesome. Sean Carlton would like to know, will you be reporting on any findings regarding mobile strategy?
We didn't, in this report, we didn't differentiate the user experience between those 2 platforms. So no, you won't be seeing a breakdown in this year's report on that.
Okay.
I can't help but think that the incoming freshmen were 3 or 4 years old when the iPhone was announced. So I think for them, there's no distinction.
Awesome. All right. Your point about separate CRMs for admission and advancement is common. Are there any universities that have one for both? And what CRM might that be?
Yeah, there are a lot of institutions that have one for both, and it's a range of platforms that are out there for that. We didn't drill into that specifically in our study in terms of units and who might be using what. This was reported as the primary CMS for the institution, so it's possible that there are other underlying ones scattered about the organization.
Wonderful. Jeff Harris would like to know, how can we share the importance of analytics to our leadership using Siteimprove?
I'm so glad that Jeff Harris is on this call. Let's have Jason answer that one.
Sure. So how would you use Siteimprove analytics? Basically, that could be a very long answer. Just key pieces to use within there is our behavior mapping piece, which will allow us to do, it's basically heat mapping. Let's understand how people are absorbing the content present and understand if they're engaging with anything else. Let's use our behavior tracking to start following those journeys, whether they're the ones that we intend for people to go on or whether people get creative and go on other journeys, and tell us what content is important and what content isn't. You can use user journeys, which tell you from point A to point B and what people do in between, whether it's direct or many touch points, but there's so much you can use in there. You don't need to use everything to get some significant insight on what people are doing. So if you start with those 3 pieces, that would be a great starting point that will give you some answers to some questions and understanding, is this page effective? Is it bringing people to that next step? Are people completing that journey to be a visitor? Go on campus? Are they applying? Are they inquiring? Are they donating or giving?
Awesome. And what are your thoughts on 58% of respondents wanting to modernize user experience, but universities often being slow to hire and utilize UX, CX senior leadership?
Yeah, I think that gets back to the importance of elevating this towards a strategic plan or the minimum strategic objectives within Marcom and IT. That the ones who are slower to evolve are always going to be a little bit behind the curve in terms of what your end goals are around enrollment and advancement and other institutional benchmarks for visibility. So I think that the farther up we can elevate these things, that the more likely we're going to be successful in how we resource both senior leadership levels as well as our mid-level directors too.
Just to add on to that, I think that this is, this is part of why we do this research at all, is to try and empower people in your positions with, even just some of the benchmarking data you need in order to, to fight for more resources, whether those are financial or staffing positions, or new tools, whatever that may be. We made a note, again, you'll see in the full report that there's, when we were looking for the respondent profile that, shows a mature marketing operation, there was no specific profile type. It wasn't a type of institution with a certain enrollment size or public versus private. It could be anyone, which we think is really positive. But we think it comes down to really two things. And one is leadership that understands the importance of becoming a digital first brand. And I would say that by being on this call, that's probably evidence of that. But it's inextricably related also to resourcing. And so you can have the brightest and best leadership, but if you don't have the resources, you're never going to get there. And on the flip side, you can have all the resources in the world, and if you don't have the right leadership, again, you're not going to get there. So we hope that this research helps fight for the resources needed in order to to create more mature marketing operations.
All right, I know we're coming up on time. I do have a question I want to throw to the panelists from Rebecca. We are attempting to integrate CMS and CRM for personalized content. There is apprehension about this putting student data at risk. Is this a valid concern, and how do we address it?
I would strongly suggest that you've got someone on the team who can fully explain the ins and outs of where the data is going. Like, there are lots of ways you could do personalization that would definitely put student data at risk. And there are ways you could do it that are much lighter touch that would barely qualify as personalization. If it's just we're giving a different message to people who visit from the East Coast versus people who visit from the West Coast versus people who visit from the state of Illinois because we're an institution in Illinois. That's less risky. But my concern around personalization is that for much of the market, it's hand wavy magic. And if you don't have someone on the team who can see through the hand wavy magic, then I would not recommend trusting that the student data is going to be safe.
Yeah, I think the only thing I back that with is that, you need to be looking at the platforms and the partners that you're using. There's a lot of great CMS options that have really awesome support that can do content personalization in a safe way. And there are integration points between your CRMs that can also aid in that as well. But to Steve's point, if there isn't an internal lead who can be doing that work for you, you need to find someone to take that leadership role, or likely work with some outside help to make that an type of activity effective for you and also safe.
Wonderful. All right, Malachi, so we are at the hour. Would you like a few more questions, or do you want to take some of these questions offline? because we can keep it going.
It's on mute. We can take a few more questions. Obviously,
All right.
people can drop off as their schedule necessitates, but we'll keep the recording going, and that way people can listen in if they were looking for a specific question.
All right.
We'll
Wonderful.
take 2 more, Tiffany.
Wonderful, wonderful. Steve Maui would like to know, how are you seeing institutions managing constituent data? Is data management distributed across institution, or are you seeing centralized data management emerging in higher ed?
We're certainly seeing it emerging, and again, it would come back to probably the more mature organizations do have centralized management there. We didn't ask specifically about that in this survey, so it'd be hard to say much beyond that, unless anybody else has thoughts here on the call or can point to other information sources.
Awesome. All right. And let's see, there's one that says, Bob, can you share these dashboards with everyone on the call? I'm interested in seeing these as well.
Yes, if you signed up for the webinar, you're going to receive an email probably in about the next hour that will have a link to the recording, as well as a link to download the report in its full form. And that will also be available through all 3 websites for everybody who's on this call. You'll be able to find a link right there on our homepage, as well as everybody else's, to find and download this report. Feel free to share that link with anybody who you think would be interested in it, and it should be easy to find.
All right. Well, with that, Bob, I'll let you go ahead and take it away. Thank you all for joining. This was a wonderful, wonderful webinar. Thank you to Simpson-Scarborough, Siteimprove, and Pantheon. We'll see y'all online.
Great. Thanks, everybody.